Hello everyone, my name is Matt, also known as the Survivor Guy, and today I am running a cost-benefit analysis on every single time a survivor has had the opportunity to risk their vote to gain an advantage in the game in order to figure out, is it actually worth it for you to risk your vote?
The question is, with $1 million on the line, will you risk it or play it safe?
Survivor 50 is finally here, and based off what I've seen so far, it actually seems like it might be worth the hype. Certainly a breath of fresh air compared to all of the other seasons that we've seen in the new era, even though there are some new era elements that are still being used in Survivor 50. And one of those new era elements that we have seen already is the journey, where certain survivors are picked to get on a boat and have an opportunity to risk losing their vote and could possibly win an advantage if they do so. Now, I don't want to spoil anything for Survivor 50 in case any of you are not caught up, but there was one moment involving a journey in Survivor 50 that ultimately led to a rather unfortunate circumstance, and that got me thinking about how often is it actually worth it for you to risk your vote? Now, obviously, every time a survivor goes on a journey, the edit always makes it out like, oh, it's this big thing, like, do I risk my vote? Do I not risk my vote? Is it better to have the advantage? Do I need my vote for next tribal? There are all these factors that come into play. So I thought, well, if I look at every single time over the past 10 seasons that a survivor has had the opportunity to risk their vote, I can analyze the choice that they made, and then from that choice, knowing how it ended up, because we've seen the entire season, I can figure out, was it worth it for that person to make the choice that they made? Was it worth it for them to risk their vote, or should they have kept their vote and said, I don't need an advantage? So by looking at all of the times that a Survivor contestant risked their vote over the past 10 seasons, we should be able to figure out a definitive answer to what percentage of the time is it actually worthwhile to take that risk. Now, if you've seen my videos before, you know that I am a man of science, which means when I do videos like this, I want an objective answer. I want as little subjectivity as possible in my conclusion. So in order to figure out for each individual person, was it worthwhile for them to risk their vote or should they have not risked their vote, I came up with this little flowchart which will help us kind of more easily organize, yes, it was worth it, or no, it was not worth it. I get that this flowchart can be a little bit overwhelming at first glance, but it really wouldn't be a Survivor Guy video if I didn't have a ridiculously overthought and complicated premise. So first things first, when deciding whether or not the decision to risk their vote was worth it, we have to kind of split off into two paths. The first path being they got the advantage, and the second path being they didn't get the advantage. And I'm not going to make it so simple as, well, if they got the advantage, it was worth it, and if they lost their vote, then it's not worth it. Because there have been scenarios where people have lost their vote, but it turns out they didn't need it, and I would say that that was probably worth the risk. And there have also been scenarios where people have gotten the advantage, but the fact that they risked their vote put such a huge target on them that they went home with the advantage in their pocket. So we definitely need to take a closer look at each of these scenarios. So if we start with the track where they got the advantage, this one is a bit more simple. The way that I have it laid out is if they got the advantage and the advantage helped them in the game in any way, so it saved them from going home or it helped them sway the votes to get the person they wanted to go home, in that scenario, the advantage definitely helped them out, which means it was worth risking your vote. If the advantage did not help them, so they went home with it in their pocket or it placed a bigger target on their back, well, then it's definitely not worth it for them to risk their vote because getting the advantage probably harmed their game more than it helped them. So now if we look at the other side, where the Survivor contestants risked their vote and they lost, this one is a little bit more complicated. So if they risked their vote and they made it through the next tribal council without a vote and nothing was any different, then I'm going to say it was worth it to risk your vote because you didn't really need your vote anyway and you could have had an advantage even though it didn't work out for you this time. If they were voted out without a vote, the next thing we have to look at is, would they have been voted out if they had their vote? If it was a really close vote, like a tie or like a 3-2 vote or something like that, then probably not worth it for you to risk it because your vote could have changed the outcome of that tribal council and you wouldn't have gone home. If it was a unanimous vote or like a 4-1 vote or something like that, your vote wouldn't have changed the outcome anyway. So then the last thing that we have to check is, since you risked your vote, you had no vote, but you were going to be voted out anyway. if you got the advantage, right, you won that coin flip and you earned yourself an advantage, would that have saved you from going home? Because if that would have saved you from going home, then yeah, it was worth it for you to risk your vote, even though it didn't work out in your favor this time. If that advantage would not have saved them from going home, then they're pretty much screwed no matter what they did. So by going on a journey and risking their vote, they're just increasing the target, which was already really large on their back, and kind of digging their grave even further. So I'm going to say it was not worth it for them to risk their vote there. So now that we've established the criteria for what is and is not worth risking your vote, we can start looking at all of the new era seasons of Survivor and looking at each player that had an opportunity to risk their vote. And it's worth noting here that I am not including Beware advantages, I'm only including journeys. And the reason that I'm not including Beware advantages is because most of the time, especially in the post 41 and 42 seasons of Survivor, if you get a Beware advantage, the task that you have to do is normally accomplishable before the first tribal council where you would not have had your vote. So most contestants that get the Beware advantage earn their vote back before tribal anyway, so it's not really risking your vote. So I'm not going to include those in the data because I think it would skew the data in a way that we don't really want. Alright, so kicking it off with season 41, where the concept of journeys and risking your vote for an advantage was introduced. Over the course of this season, only 4 people chose to risk their vote. More had the opportunity to risk their vote and chose not to. So the 4 that chose to risk their vote in the season were JD, Xander, Deshawn, and Liana. Of the 4 of them, all 4 of them actually got the advantage, so nobody ended up losing their vote in this season. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean it was worth it for all 4 of these people to risk their vote. So for example, JD did risk his vote, he got an extra vote, but by obtaining that extra vote, he kind of sealed his own demise. So if I follow JD's story after getting that advantage, later on in the season, Shan, who was his ally, convinced him to let her hold on to the extra vote, and while she was holding on to the extra vote, she sent him home.
So can I hold it for you?
If that will make you trust me, I'll do it.
5th person voted out of Survivor 41. JD. That's 3. You need to bring me your torch.
If he doesn't have the extra vote, that probably doesn't happen. So I do not think it was worth it for JD to risk his vote because by getting that advantage, he ultimately caused himself to be voted out of the game. I also think for Deshawn and Liana, them risking their vote was not worth it. Deshawn used his extra vote, however, it was not enough to overcome the votes against him. He got the advantage, but it didn't really help him out. He didn't use it in a way that was beneficial to him, so really not worth it for him to risk his vote for an advantage that didn't end up helping him. Same thing with Liana. I don't remember a whole lot from season 41 because I didn't really like it that much, but one of the things that I do remember is Liana failing miserably with the knowledge is power advantage.
Do you have an idol, Xander?
No, but you can have this fig.
Because the tribe knew about the advantage, Xander was able to pass off his idol, leading to Liana looking foolish when she used this new advantage for the first time in tribal, and it did not work out. So if she were to get to the final 3, this is something that would reflect bad on her in front of the jury, so the advantage kind of acted against her in this scenario. Now, with Xander's extra vote, I decided to say that this was worth it for him. The extra vote that he used wasn't necessary to send Liana home. It ended up being a 5-3 vote with the extra vote, so it would have been 4-3, which still would have been enough. However, I don't think this acted against Xander. I think because of the game that he had been playing, and the fact that he had other advantages like idols, him using this advantage just kind of added to his story of I've been playing hard, I've been finding advantages, and it wasn't like an embarrassing misplay of the extra vote. It was a close vote, so the extra vote was kind of an insurance vote. So I do think in the eyes of the jury, him using that extra vote gave him a little bit of extra points. Obviously not enough for him to win the season, but I think that it was worth it for him to risk his vote because I do think the advantage helped him in the game. In season 42, we also saw 4 survivors choose to risk their vote, those 4 being Drea, Marianne, Chanel, and Omar. In this season, we actually did have 2 of the people lose their vote in addition to the 2 that gained an advantage. So Drea and Marianne are the 2 that gained the advantage, Chanel and Omar are the 2 that lost their votes. Regarding whether or not it was worth it for each of these four, Drea had an extra vote. She used it in the tribal where she was being voted out. The extra vote was not enough for her to save herself. So because the advantage did not help her in the game, I'm going to say it was not worth it for her to risk her vote. Marianne, on the other hand, used her extra vote very effectively. She used it late in the game where it would have been a 2-2-2 tie, but her extra vote broke the tie and sent Omar home, which was great for Marianne because Omar was a very strong threat to win the game.
2 votes Jonathan, 2 votes Romeo, 2 votes Omar, 1 vote left.
Regarding Chanel and Omar, I say it is worth it for both of them to have risked their votes because both of them survived the tribal where they had no vote. So definitely worth it for them to try and get an advantage if they weren't going to go home either way. Season 43 saw 5 Survivor contestants risk their vote, those 5 being Dwight, Mike Gabler, Janine, Jesse, and Gio. Of those 5, 3 lost their vote, so Dwight, Janine, and Jesse all lost their vote. None of those 3 were voted out at the tribal where they didn't have their vote, so I'm going to say it was worth it for all 3 of them to risk their vote. With Gabler, this one was a little bit of a tough one to say whether or not it was worth it, because he got a temporary idol that he never used, he let it expire. In the end, I decided to say it was worth it for him to risk his vote, because I think his honesty about the whole thing kind of went a long way in cementing him as a loyal person in people's eyes. With Gio, I'm going to say it was not worth it. He got a knowledge is power, and as soon as he told an ally that he obtained an advantage, he was then voted out because people were scared of his advantage.
I have to do something about this.
So, Gio did risk it.
I think Gio's the best move right now.
So definitely worked against him in that scenario. Season 44 only saw 3 contestants risk their vote, those 3 being Lauren, Matt, and Sarah. Of the 3, only Matt lost his vote. He was not voted out, so I'm going to say it was worth it for him to risk his vote. Lauren got a bank your vote advantage, and while she did succeed in the first part of the advantage, which is not voting at one tribal so you get an extra vote later, she ended up misplaying that extra vote, and whenever you misplay an advantage, that always looks bad on you, which is why I said it is not worth it for her to have risked her vote. Now, Sarah is a bit of an interesting case in this season because the way that journeys worked here, there was an initial risk that the survivors could take where they either get an advantage or lose their vote, and if they ended up losing their vote, they could then choose to risk again to either lose a second vote or to gain the advantage that they didn't get the first time. And Sarah risked her vote, lost her vote the first time, risked it again, and got the advantage the second time. So she both lost her vote and got the advantage, which kind of breaks the laws of physics regarding my flowchart, and kind of pisses me off if I'm being honest. So this one was obviously a little bit tricky. She wasn't voted out in the tribal that she didn't have a vote, which normally means it was worth the risk. But she also never used her advantage, which to me would say it was not worth the risk. Why are you risking your vote for an advantage that you're not going to use? So I kind of went back and forth a little bit on this one. Ultimately, I decided the fact that she never used the advantage means that it wasn't worth the risk because you could have been voted out in that tribal without a vote. You weren't, but it was possible, and there was no benefit to her doing this because she never used the advantage. Season 45 was a nice easy one for me because there were only 2 people that risked their advantage, those people being Drew and Brandon. Drew ended up getting a safety without power advantage. While he never actually used this advantage, he did tell a lot of his allies about it, which banked him a lot of goodwill and kind of increased his status in the game.
So Drew comes back and straight up shows us the note saying, I have a safety without power. I feel that he's really trying to play a loyal game.
So even though he never used the advantage, he did still benefit from having it, so I'm going to say it was worth it for him. With Brandon, we have our first instance of someone who was voted out when they did not have a vote. Even though he was voted out without a vote, it was so stacked against him that had he had his vote, he still would have been going home. However, we know, because he was on the same journey as Drew, that if he did get the advantage instead of losing his vote, it would have been a safety without power, which would have caused him to leave tribal and not be voted out. So I'm going to say it was worth it for him to risk his vote because had he gotten the advantage, he would have stayed in the game. He was just unlucky and lost his vote instead. Season 45 made it really easy on me because they only had 2 people, which of course had to be compensated by Season 46, which saw 6 people risking their vote. Those 6 people were Jelinski, Maria, Tevin, Ben, Banu, and Hunter. Of the 6 of them, 4 of them actually ended up losing their vote. Ben and Hunter were not voted out in the tribal where they had no vote. So for them, I'm going to say it was worth it to risk it. In regards to Jelinski, he was voted out without a vote. He would have been voted out even if he had his vote. It was unanimous. However, going on the journey is the reason he was voted out.
He never delivers, you know? He went to the journey, he raised his hand, he volunteered. When you don't deliver time and time again, in my world, you get dismissed.
Because he went on the journey and didn't come back with the advantage, that's why Q was upset with him. Well, part of the reason anyway, which is what led to him being unanimously voted out. So I'm going to say it wasn't worth it for Jelinski to risk his vote, because if he didn't risk his vote, he was working with Q. It's possible that he could have gone a lot further in the game. It's even possible he could have made it to day several.
Last I checked, several means 7.
Now, the only one we haven't talked about from this season yet is Banu, who is, just like Jelinski, a very interesting case. Banu was voted out when he did not have a vote. It was unanimous. Nobody got the advantage on the journey that Banu went on where he lost his vote, so we don't know what that advantage was and if it would have saved him. However, I'm going to say it wasn't worth it for Banu because unless that advantage was an idol that would have guaranteed Banu's safety, Banu was going home. I mean, every single person in the tribe straight up told him to his face, "You're going home." At Tribal, he basically soft quit the game.
So I'm getting a sense that you're already nodding. You finished. What was I going to say?
That Banu is going home tonight.
Anything short of an idol, which we've only seen one time as a reward on a journey, would not have saved Banu here, so I'm going to say it was not worth it for him to go. So Maria and Tevin are the 2 survivors from this season who did get an advantage, both of them getting extra votes. I'm going to say it was worth it for Maria because the same as with Xander in season 41, her extra vote wasn't exactly necessary for her to vote out who she wanted to, but it was a very close vote. So it was kind of an insurance vote that in the eyes of the jury would probably be looked upon favorably. With Tevin, I'm going to say it was not worth it for him to get the extra vote because he never used it. And the fact that he had it and people knew that he had it was a factor in his blindside and him going home. Season 47 saw 4 people risking their votes, those 4 being Annika, Kyle, Rachel, and Rome. Of those 4, 2 of them lost their vote, those 2 being Annika and Kyle, and 2 gained an advantage, being Rome and Rachel. Kyle was not voted out in the tribal where he had no vote, so I'm going to say it was worth it for him to risk. Annika was voted out in the tribal where she had no vote. It was a 3-1 vote, so if she had her vote, it would have been 3-2. She still would have gone home. We know that the advantage that was gained from this journey was a vote steal. So if Annika had that vote steal, instead of being 3-1 against her, the vote would have been 3-2 in her favor. So I'm going to say it was worth it for her to risk her vote here. So from that same journey I was just talking about, Rome did get the advantage. He got the vote steal. Even though he got the advantage, I'm going to say it was not worth it for Rome to risk his vote for 2 reasons. So the first one, he used the vote steal on a unanimous vote. He said it was because he wanted the person they were voting out to not play their shot in the dark, but they were blindsiding that person, so they wouldn't have played their shot in the dark anyway. And before they ended up doing that, he tried to use his vote steal to basically bully Saul into giving up his shot in the dark.
I'm letting you know if you don't give me your shot in the dark, I'm using the steal vote on you tonight, and you'll be going home. I have the advantage.
What are you talking about, bro? You're like threatening me right now.
And one of the reasons that Rome had such a villain negative reputation in this season is because of that. And I think that is part of the reason that he was voted out. So even though he got the advantage and he didn't go home with it in his pocket, I think the fact that he had that advantage caused more of a net negative on his game than it did a positive one. So I'm going to say it was not worth it for Rome. Regarding Rachel's advantage, she got a vote block. She did use it to block Sam's vote, who was probably going to vote against her. However, in that tribal, the vote was unanimous against her, and she ended up playing an idol anyway. Even though technically the advantage was wasted because she had to use an idol anyway, I'm going to say it was worth it for Rachel because part of the reason that she won that season is because of the dominant game that she played, and I think having just one more advantage used in there added more to her story of, I've been finding idols, I've been finding advantages, I've been winning immunity, like I'm a dominant player in this game. So I think doing that in front of the jury was a very positive move for her game. In season 48, once again, we saw 6 survivors risking their vote, those 6 being Mitch, Thomas, Mary, Camilla, Bianca, and Justin. Of those 6, 3 lost their vote, those 3 being Mary, Bianca, and Justin. Mary was not voted out in the tribal where she had no vote, so it was worth it for her to risk her vote. Bianca was very close to surviving the tribal where she had no vote. If she didn't tell Cedric about the fact that she had no vote, Say was going to go home.
To get this type of information just minutes before we're going to tribal council, I could turn this all around back on Bianca.
So because the fact that she had no vote was the reason she went home, she would not have gone home if she had her vote, which means it was not worth it for her to risk her vote. With Justin, we have a very similar story. That vote ended up being a 1-1 tie between him and Say, so if he had his vote, no tie there, Say goes home, and Justin lives to see another day. Definitely not worth the risk. Regarding the 3 players who gained an advantage, Mitch gained a block a vote, which he used on Say. That ended up being a unanimous vote. However, his reasoning for blocking her vote is that she didn't play her shot in the dark, and based on her reaction at Tribal, she probably was going to play her shot in the dark, so I'm going to say this was a positive move for Mitch, and therefore was worth it for him to risk his vote. Thomas gained a vote steal, however, he was voted out during the tribe swap, never using his vote steal, so because he never used his advantage, I'm going to say it wasn't worth it for him to risk his vote. Camilla had an extra vote that she used in that same tribal where Thomas was voted out. She didn't really use it, she gave it to her ally in Kyle to use it, and even though he also used an idol, so he didn't really need to use it there, I'm going to say that this exchange of advantages was a net positive for Camilla, because the reason that Kyle won that season and Camilla made it really far in that season is because of the secret alliance the two of them had, and I feel like this move really cemented that alliance. This was a major test for them, so definitely a net positive on Camilla's game, meaning it was worth it for her to risk her vote. And last but not least, Season 49. Season 49 only saw 1 survivor who risked their vote, that survivor being Steven. He ended up earning a block a vote advantage from this journey, which he used to block Savannah's vote. However, the vote ended up being 4-1 against him anyway, so because the advantage did not help him, I'm going to say it was not worth it for Steven to risk his vote, especially because he had a very high threat level, and the fact that he had an advantage only increased that threat level higher. So if we tally up all of the information that we've discussed so far, what we end up with is 20 times it was worth it when survivors risked their vote, and 15 times it was not worth it, which means 57%, a slight majority of the time, it was worth it to risk your vote for an advantage, and 42.9% of the time, it was not worth it for survivors to risk their advantage. Now, in addition to the fact that a almost 50-50 split of worth it and not worth it is not a very satisfying conclusion to a video, there's something else about this data that just didn't really sit right with me, and that's the fact that a lot of the times when it was not worth it for survivors to risk their vote, it was because they had an advantage and they either didn't play it or they misplayed it, and had they played the advantage correctly, it could have been worth it for them to have risked their votes. So because of this, I decided to omit all of the data points where survivors won an advantage and misplayed it in the not worth it category, and take a look at that data to see if there was any difference in the results. So looking at this data now, what we see is 20 times it was worth it for survivors to risk their vote, and 7 times it was not worth it, meaning we have almost a 75% worth it and 25% not worth it. And I feel a bit better about this data than the original data because different survivors are going to play their advantages differently. So even if you take multiple survivors in the exact same situation, some of them could have used the advantage in a way that it was worth it, as opposed to the survivors that wasted their advantage and ended up being not worth it. So I think it's fair to conclude that about 75% of the time, it is worth it to risk your vote in exchange for an advantage in Survivor. Now, obviously, I know that this data isn't bulletproof and that a lot of whether or not it's worth it depends on recognizing the situation that you're in. Situational awareness is one of the most important skills that you can have on Survivor. However, any survivor hopefuls out there like myself, hopefully this gives you a little bit of reassurance that if you are in a situation where you're wondering whether or not it's worth it to risk your vote, you can remember that the survivor guide told you that 75% of the time that it's worth it, so you might as well try it and hope for the best. And if you're in that 25% of the time where it's not worth it, my name is actually not the survivor guy, my name is Russell Hantz. So hopefully you all found this informative. If you liked the video, please consider liking and subscribing. That would help me out a lot. And if you work at CBS, give me a call. See you next time, everyone.